What my book is about is the way that feminism has been co-opted. And that's why I've called it Feminism for Women. Because at the moment, I would argue, and I do argue, that the feminism that currently passes as such benefits men more than it does women.
Hi, Julie. Thank you so much for joining me today for this new episode dedicated to feminism and essentially to your book, Feminism for Women. First question, can you tell us why you wrote this book precisely at this moment in time? What really motivated you?
Right now, we're in the midst of a really nasty, virulent backlash, not just against feminism, but against women's rights and women in general. And this has been played out in several ways. For example, the silencing of women who dare to deviate from what so-called progressive men decide are the key issues. And also because of the rise of the sex trade, including pornography, very harmful, misogynistic pornography that is being directed at girls and women. And we're supposed to think that this is liberation. We're supposed to think that this is fun. But also in the so-called culture war, which is in fact a war against truth and reality, women are being told that our hard-won sex-based legal rights should be given away and replaced with so-called gender identity, by which I mean that anyone can say that they feel like a woman, that they feel that they have a right to invade the women-only spaces that we have developed over decades as a response to male sexual violence towards us. So the book, for me, is timely because it addresses the mythology about feminism, but also speaks, I hope, to younger women, to younger feminists. And it's my hope that it will be a tool or even some ammunition for those younger feminists to be able to resist what passes as feminism today, what masquerades as feminism today.
I'm pretty sure it will help many young women understand these issues better and see how they are being manipulated and disinformed and propagandized. But I can tell you, as a man, I've learned tons of things and I understand tons of stuff more thanks to your book. Really, it's so dense, so packed with examples and brilliant analysis, and really I feel a lot better in understanding these issues, although I will never pretend to understand feminism because I'm not a woman, so this is something I cannot pretend to be or to do. So yeah, one excerpt from your book, you wrote, these issues affect half of the planet. It is uncompromising because we are, I firmly believe, on the cusp of losing so many rights and freedoms we have won during the women's liberation movement. So yeah, this is a quite worrying conclusion that you came to after decades of activism. If you're saying this, I mean, you're sounding the alarm here. I feel so. The situation is extremely bad. So, do you really fear that things could go backwards if it's not already going backwards in terms of rights that have been won by women? And what rights precisely do you mean?
Well, for example, the right to organize autonomously from men. And I'm not talking about separatism. I'm not talking about an ideological approach to male violence and patriarchy. I'm not interested in separating myself off from half of the planet and pretending that that solves the problem of male violence and male domination. It does not. It gives some women a reprieve. I'm talking about the legal rights that we have fought for and won, that were necessary and are necessary because of male violence. Now, obviously, here I need to bring in a qualifier. It's not a caveat, it's a qualifier. Of course, not all men are rapists. Of course, not all men hate women. So, of course, not all men cause us harm and abuse us. But enough men do, and it's enough of a pattern of male offending, which I believe is totally socially constructed, not innate, not biologically or genetically driven. But there's enough of a pattern of male violence to show that we need to safeguard against it. So that's why we have women's refuges, so that the very many women that are subject to domestic violence and abuse in the home from their partners or former partners can escape, because these cases often end in homicide. One woman every 3 days in England and Wales dies as a result of domestic violence from a male partner or former partner. It's why we have rape crisis shelters and rape crisis helplines, because so many women are raped. It's why we have separate changing and sports facilities for girls and for women, because of the prevalence of sexual abuse from flashing to rape in such facilities. But it's also about legal protection, including laying down an exemption in law that you can, quote unquote, discriminate against men in certain jobs. For example, if a man wanted to apply to run a domestic violence shelter or run a women's refuge, they could legally be exempt from that position, because it's wholly inappropriate for a man to run such a facility when women are escaping from men, when women can only really speak about male violence and sexual abuse together, where there are no men present. And that's not because we're all very timid or faint at the sight of a penis in a changing room. It's nothing to do with that. It's because we know that there is enough of a significant threat of male violence for us to need to ward that off, and to give women the reprieve, the refuge from constantly having to bat off sexual harassment, sexual assault, just everyday sexism that is a feature of all women and girls' lives. And the reason why we're on the verge of losing so many of those rights is because, precisely, as I said earlier, of the campaign by some organisations that consider themselves progressive, such as Stonewall here in the UK, which was a gay rights organisation and now is more of a trans rights organisation. Stonewall are campaigning to remove sex-based rights in law and replace it with gender identity. Now, this is not being against trans people. Transgender people of every stripe have the right and the necessity to live free from the discrimination and abuse that face women, or that face people of colour, or that face refugees, disabled people, etc. And I support those rights, and I stand with trans people to defend those rights and to maintain those rights. But where there's a clash of rights, for example, male-bodied trans women who are sex offenders, convicted sex offenders in women's prisons, and again, Stonewall and other organisations are campaigning for those male-bodied trans women who are sex offenders to be in female prisons, then we have to see that this is not only a clash of rights, but it's removing the rights of female prisoners who are, in every country of the world, the most vulnerable and abused in society. Often, usually in fact, it's male violence that got them into prison in the first place, either directly or indirectly. So the idea that convicted sex offenders who are male-bodied can have a legal right to be in women's prisons is an abhorrence. And that's why we need to continue to fight for our sex-based rights. It's not about trans people, it's about male violence. And that same pattern of male violence can be seen in male-bodied trans women because they've been socialized as male.
Absolutely. It was very clear in your book. Yeah, this is I mean, it's an extreme form of domination, because it's an assault on womanhood, right? It's an assault of what a woman is. For instance, in your book, you said indeed, you cited the example of these transgender men, so women who have transitioned, of men who have transitioned to become a woman, or to allegedly become a woman, who have committed sex offenses, and who are jailed. But when they are jailed as a woman, meaning with other women, which is nonsense. And of course, some of them, or many of them, will continue offending women inside the prison. So yeah, this is quite horrible situation, and it really makes no sense, except if, of course, if you understand this wider system of domination, which is patriarchy, which goes extremely far.
And I appreciate your analysis of that, Mehdi, because this is purely about male violence and domination. This is not about trans people at all. So clearly the majority of trans people do not abuse. They are extremely vulnerable. But there are, of course, those men that see the opportunity to transition and to have a slightly easier time in prison, because male prisons are horrific places. Women's prisons are terrible, but the level of violence in men's prisons, including sexual violence that's committed from stronger bullying men towards weaker men, more vulnerable men, is endemic. And why women should mop up the mess of this, I do not know, because this is what we've been doing for centuries. But to move away from the issue of trans-identified males in women's prisons and those sex-based rights, what my book is about overall, because the trans issue only has a kind of plays a minor role in this, and it's in context. It's within the context, as you've just pointed out, of the patriarchal society. What my book is about is the way that feminism has been co-opted. And that's why I've called it Feminism for Women, because at the moment, I would argue, and I do argue, that the feminism that currently passes as such benefits men more than it does women. So, for example, if you look at the decades, in fact, centuries-long campaign, starting with Josephine Butler in the 1800s, against the crime, the human rights violation of prostitution, which is to see women as vessels for one-sided sexual pleasure. We can see today that the narrative, which was an accepted narrative, because it makes sense, amongst feminists, was that prostitution only exists because of male dominance and the view of women as sexually subservient, barely human beings, where an orifice can be rented out by an abusive third party to a man that has no concern whatsoever whether or not she is consenting. In other words, that it's an abuse of women's human rights and that it is part of male dominance and violence towards women and girls. Now, the narrative today by those particularly highly privileged women and men within the academy, so in our universities all over the world, and I've travelled every corner of the globe to research this issue. The narrative today is that it is sex work, not prostitution. They attempt to normalise the inside of a woman's body as a workplace. These people consider that there is no harm in prostitution other than the police arresting the women. And of course, all of us, whatever position we take on prostitution or against any prostituted person being criminalised. The new narrative has turned the reality of prostitution on its head. So we now are told that pimps are managers, that prostitution is work, that decriminalisation of the entire sex trade, including brothel owning and pimping, is the way forward, rather than tackling the root cause of women's bodies being used and abused in this way. And the root cause, of course, being patriarchy and male violence. We're told that stripping and pole dancing is liberating and empowering. And we're told, and this happens to many, many feminist sisters of mine who are ex-Muslim, who were born into Muslim families and communities, we are told that the full face veil and other symbols of religious doctrine are liberating for women and a choice. So when any woman, be she a former Muslim woman, be she a white secular feminist, critiques fundamentalist religion of this nature, we are told that this is Islamophobic. We're told that this is somehow racist, despite the fact that clearly we're talking about religion and not race or ethnicity. So these things have been turned on their head, and men do benefit from, of course, religious fundamentalism. Men benefit from prostitution, even those that don't buy women in this way. They benefit from our subservience. They benefit from the porn industry, which gives them a message that they can do whatever they want to women and we won't complain.
In the next part,
liberal feminism has always been with us since the beginning of the US-based women's liberation movement, which was always about lean-in feminism. It was always about glass ceilings, about women at the top. And my feminism and proper feminism has always been about women at the very bottom.